Good evening, everybody. We're right at 6 o'clock, and I'd like to respect your time. My name is Marty Lexon. I serve as the superintendent of the West Allis West Milwaukee School District. And before I get started, I'd like to introduce Noah Lee, who's over here, is the president of the school board. Jamie Carr is down in front here. She is a member of the school board. And thanks to all of you for spending some time with us. No matter which way you decide to vote, we want to make sure our voters are informed. And this is really about sharing information about the upcoming referendum question that will be on the April 5th ballot. And I'm going to spend about 30 minutes in the information session presentation. And following that, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of the experts. And I'll explain what that means a little bit further in the presentation, but we want a lot of people to have access to the experts in different parts of the plan so that you can go directly and ask your questions. So this is really about the upcoming referendum, but first, what we're here to do tonight, and I already mentioned this a little bit, we want to build an understanding of what's going to be on the referendum question, or what will be included in the referendum question on April 5th. We're going to focus really carefully on beginning and ending on time, so I'll talk a little fast so I keep my part of it on time. But also that, so we have about a half an hour for you to explore the questions that you're curious about. This is really, and we'll provide this opportunity if there's a particular area that you're interested in related to finance, for example. You could really just spend all your time asking the experts around finance, or if you're curious about the building construction and the way transition will happen. We have people here from the architects and engineers, so you'd be able to explore that. A couple of things we're not here to do. We're not here to go into detail about every single building in the district. We're going to really focus on the high schools. There are a lot of facility needs across the district. We've worked hard to put together a 20-year vision, a master plan around facilities. All of that information is available on our website, but tonight we're going to talk about the high schools. And then we're not here to address questions related to other district matters. We're going to really try to stay focused on this so we use our time well together. So with that, I want to start with a little bit of our progress. And I think, hopefully, if you're aware, if you're not, this will make you aware. We hit several years ago, 7 years ago, a pretty significant financial challenge. Right? And that was just when I was starting, so I inherited that. And so we're not all that proud of the headline on the left. Right? So this was an article that appeared in our local press. West Allis School District turns to taxpayers after blowing through $17.5 million. So when we hit the big financial challenge, one of the strategies that we tried was coming to you with an operational referendum, right? And that was voted down. It wasn't a huge no, but it was a no. And so we took that feedback and we made very difficult choices. We froze salaries, we got rid of performance compensation, we cut all kinds of travel, school budgets were cut, and little by little, we've returned to fiscal stability and even really positive fiscal position. And 3 years after that really difficult time, the headline on the right appeared, right, that experts now rate our financial outlook as positive. And that's a little bit why there's an opportunity for us to be asking this referendum question. So what does that positive mean? It really has to do with credit rating. So school districts also have a credit rating. When we hit the financial challenges, our credit rating was down on the lower left, BA1, in that kind of pink reddish. If you look to the right, it says junk status, right? So we were junk bond status in our credit rating. 3 years later, we're now at AA-, which is considered high grade. And just like our own personal credit scores, if they're higher, and we want to borrow money, we get better interest rate. So that's why this matters, and why turning it around in 3 years is a pretty significant accomplishment for us. So our finances are strong, and we're able to really project well into the future. So, why are we talking about the high schools? And obviously there's some problems we're trying to solve, right? So a project of this size is trying to meet some specific need. And it really comes down to three things. First, even though our buildings are well maintained, they're old, and they're not going to get any younger. Right? So if you follow kind of Dan Devine et al. On social media, or if you're aware that when we hit our Wisconsin winter cold snaps, which we always do, water lines in West Allis, some of the water mains were breaking right under the streets. That happens when you have old water mains. And Dan Devine got on social media and said, well, you need to understand, some of these water mains are 50 years old, but the oldest we have are 100, and they're going to break. right? And you have to, at times, go in and replace those kinds of systems. Normal school budgets in the state of Wisconsin, the way we're funded, don't anticipate those kinds of expenses. That's why there's a referendum mechanism built into the Wisconsin state law around school funding. The oldest part of any of our buildings right now is the oldest part at Lane. It is over 100 years old. And this year, the oldest part of Jefferson turns 100 years old. So the plumbing in the old part of Jefferson is 100, like the water mains. The toilets still flush, but eventually you have to replace the systems, right? So that's a big part of this, old buildings. The second part of this is too many buildings. Right? We used to serve 12,000 students across the buildings we currently have. We now have 7,400 students. So we are actually operating space and trying to heat it and cool it and clean it and fix it when it breaks that we don't need anymore. Right? So there's a whole bunch of money that goes into keeping up with old facilities we don't actually need that could go to classrooms. Right? And we'd rather put the savings that can come from this back into the classrooms with kids. We'd like to pay our teachers better. And so old buildings, too many buildings, and then the last big need is the buildings we have no longer support the kind of learning we're asking our teachers to engage our students with. Right? So we do far more hands-on learning these days, far more project-based learning. We'd like to introduce far more opportunities in the trades. And the buildings we currently have are designed for when kids sat in rows. Right? That's not how we educate kids anymore. We want kids up and active and engaged. So those are the big challenges we're trying to solve. So some of the big questions that have come up are why are we pursuing this referendum? Right? What's included? What will this accomplish? What will it cost me? Right? I think that's a really important question for everybody to get their heads around. And then what happens if it fails? So I'm going to go through these quickly. So again, I've already touched on the aging buildings. The average age is over 76 years old across all the buildings. The newest school that was built from the ground up in our school district is Pershing Elementary in West Milwaukee, and that was in the early 70s. Right? So you get a feel for different context. The enrollment declines, and then analysis of our future needs. So we launched a community committee called FACT, Facility Advisory Community Team. It actually started in January 2020. So this is 2+ years in the making. So this idea of a referendum in April didn't come from ideas just in the last few months. It was a team of 40+ people. We had neighbors, we had a representative from every school, we had parents that were a part of this, Dan Devine was part of this, we had a representative from West Milwaukee, and they worked together with architects, with engineers, with planners, with a group that does population analysis and enrollment projections, and they went very deep into the needs within our community and the likely future needs. And so if you're really curious about the building condition, there is a 600+ page report on our website. If you go to the website, there's a whole section on the referendum, but if you scroll down a little bit, there's a tile called Facility Planning. Every presentation, every report, every piece is right there. It's all available to the public to understand how we arrived at this particular moment with a referendum about high schools. So what's included in this? This is about the merger of the two high schools, Central and Hale. It would take place over time. The idea of it is that we would phase out or close both Central and Hale. And what's behind that is when we look just at kind of future high school population, there's not a need for two high schools anymore, but we didn't want to pick one over the other. Right? It's a community that has experienced kind of the East versus West dynamic for many, many years. And we think combining is actually an opportunity to bring everybody together to celebrate all the students in our community in one high school and have better athletic teams and more art opportunities and celebrate all those kids together. So combining the two schools is part of this. But we're not trying to build a brand new school from the ground up. This is a decent building with a lot of land around it. Right? So repurposing the Nathan Hale building to create the one merged comprehensive high school. In the end, the school would have a new name. I've done a shorter presentation of this for 6th and 7th graders. Those students would be a part of selecting a new name, be part of collecting colors and a mascot and a school song, and restarting all of the cool traditions of high school. And they thought that was kind of exciting for them. So what else is included? is a partnership with MATC. And this is the piece about really moving more hands-on learning and moving more students kind of into interest in the trades. So the partnership with MATC is something we already have, but this does two things. One, if the referendum is successful, we're going to build new shops here that would be at the level to teach college level courses, right? Would be the quality and the equipment to be able to teach college level students like they do at MATC. But we want to share the spaces with MATC. And so in exchange, if the referendum passes, we'll build the spaces, they're going to put all the equipment in. And so they're going to spend more than $1 million to put in the new auto shop, to put in the new construction lab, to put a new commercial kitchen in. And then we're going to share it by having it be available to our students, high school students, on regular school days, school year, and MATC will use it nights, weekends, and summer. And that saves taxpayers a great deal of money, because otherwise they're going to go and build spaces as well when we already have them in the community. Right? So there's an opportunity there. The other thing that would be part of the partnership is to build out pathways where a student, if they really understand and know what they want to do when they leave high school, could leave high school here with a high school diploma and an associate's degree. They have a 2-year degree in 4 years. Now, that's a pretty committed student, but if somebody wants to go into the construction trades, and we all know how many jobs there are in the construction trades, they can advance themselves through high school and an associate's degree at the same time. And part of it's because we have the availability of these shops right here on campus. So that's what's included in the idea of merging the high schools. Now, why this focus on the trades? This is actually a need for better spaces in the trades. This is an example from Central High School. This is the auto lift, right? So I had explained all of this when I was talking to 7th graders. But we all know, right, cars get lifted so mechanics can get underneath and work on them, right? So if you look at this and it just pans across the auto shop first, it's really tight, right? So it's not modern space that you would teach college level students in. But you look at the red columns, the size of the auto lift, they actually go up into the ceiling. And if you raise a car at Central Auto Shop to the industry standard height, where it should be for a mechanic to work safely under the car, it would go through the ceiling tiles. Right? So it doesn't work anymore for us. And in one of these, somebody came up to me and said, just tear out the ceiling. Well, above the ceiling in an old building are all kinds of pipes. There's all kinds of plumbing. There's electrical conduit. There's data lines now because we've added all the technology. There's all the fire safety systems. You can't really do that. And so it's just an example of why better spaces for career education matter. So all this accomplished. So for the high schools, it would align enrollment with capacity, and I'm going to show some graphs about enrollment projections. It would amplify other educational opportunities. And so what happens right now with 2 smaller high schools is we have students sign up for classes in March. So the high school students and the 8th graders have already signed up for next year's classes. They look at our cool course catalog, they get all excited about some of the things like, oh, I can learn this, and they sign up for those, and then there's 5 at Central that sign up, and there's 4 here at Hill that sign up, and in August we cancel those classes. Because you can't afford to pay a teacher to educate 4 students, right? It's not fiscally appropriate. So then a counselor calls the students and says, your class got canceled, so you need to pick something else or I'll give you a study. Right? By combining students, we're more likely to offer those kind of opportunities that young people are interested in. The other thing that it would do for us, the high schools alone combining would generate savings of $2.5 million to $3 million per year. And that comes from 2 big areas. One is we reduce administrative overhead. So you don't need as many administrative level positions. Right now we have 2 principals, we'll need 1. Right? We have 4 assistant principals, we can probably use 3. We have 2 school resource officers, full-time, one in each building. We would need 1. We have 2 head secretaries. So the overhead comes down. We would still staff 27 to 1 for teachers. So 27 students equals 1 teacher in terms of staffing. That doesn't change. So class sizes stay about the same. But the overhead comes down and there's less space and there's more modern space to heat, cool, and clean. So that's where the savings comes from, and we'd like to put that savings back into classrooms. The last piece is, and I've mentioned this, is the opportunity to bring the entire community together in one place. So you can go ahead. So here's a little bit about enrollment. And there's kind of two ways I'm going to kind of walk us through this. This is overall district enrollment, and so the yellow line is total enrollment. So that's resident students, so the students that live here and go to school here, and students from other communities that come here through something called open enrollment, right? So the yellow line is everybody that's enrolled. The red or orange line, that's resident enrollment. So that's the number of students that live here that go to our schools. And the difference between the yellow and the blue, the black dotted line above, all of that blue, dark blue space, that's the excess capacity. How many students we can currently fit. Now I said we used to have 12,000, well we use buildings differently now. There's technology labs and computer labs, so the buildings don't fit as many students as they used to. But we've also had the question, well, what if enrollment grows? That would be a great problem to have. Young families start moving here and they want to raise their kids here, in part because we have better school buildings that will attract them. But if enrollment starts to grow, we can manage the difference between the orange line and the yellow line. Right? So we can move resident all the way up to that yellow line, so there's plenty of capacity because we don't have to accept as many open enrolled students. Right? So that's kind of built in to the plan if resident enrollment grows. So let's look at enrollment just at the high schools now. So right now, this year we have over 2,500 high school students. So when you look at just that, it's like, oh, we need 2 high schools. And for that number, we do. But with declining enrollment, birth rates are going down. If you look at it over it's 2 generations of high school graduates, right? So 2026, 2030. By 2030, we'll have 1,900 students, 1923 in our high schools. That's now a graduating class of 475. And it stays right about 400, 450, kind of going forward. So it does level off. It's not going to be declining forever. But there's another dynamic in this, so you go to the next one. We also have Dockey High School. Right? So Dockey High School is a project-based high school. They have a really interesting classroom setup. And for students that need a smaller environment in their high school education, we want to continue to operate Dockey. So that takes 200 to 300 students out of the total population. So I picked the middle number, 250. That leaves us with 1,673 students. That's one high school, right? And so part of kind of understanding this is if the referendum passes, we have the opportunity to create a modern space that everybody in the community will be proud of. It will be a point of community pride, like so many of our neighbors have really great high school buildings. Everybody comes together in one place. But if the referendum doesn't pass, and I think this is a reasonable prediction, a school board that may be the same or different 5 years from now will go back to these projections and say, we can't afford these 2 big buildings, we're just going to move them all over to Hale. We'll just squeeze them in. Because the fiscal and academic reality is going to create that necessity. And we're in a moment right now where interest rates are low, where we can actually create something modern that we'd be proud of. So what's it cost? Right? And we're going to break this down a couple ways. So the first kind of approach to it is for a house of $100,000 value, it's $119 per year. Right? And again, it's 25 years, so this is an investment that we're asking the community to make. But it's $119 per year, about $10 per month more in property taxes. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. So let's just talk a little bit more about, for a $200,000 house, it's $238 a year, or $20 a month. A $300,000 house comes out to about $30 a month. Right? Again, 25 years, I want to be honest about what the investment is. But there's another way to look at this. And this is, we talk a lot about, school districts about mill rates. And this, we've changed the way we're trying to explain this, but this is the mill rate piece of it, right? So on top of the mill rate is the $1.19, because mill rates are based on $1,000 of value. And if you look at the mill rate, it's still lower than any year going back to 2009, and that includes a new high school. Well, except for last year. Right? We can add the additional taxes onto the mill rate, and it's still lower going back all the way to 2009. So go to the next slide. So what's that? Oh, sorry, that wasn't that. I thought I had the other one in there. About we're going to show it just about the property, the school portion of the property taxes. It's the exact same graph, but it just kind of what's the cost for me of a $200,000 home. But it's the same concept. Is the total school property taxes on a home will be less than any time going back to 2009, except last year, and will have essentially a new high school out of it. So what happens if it fails? And this is a question where I have to be a little bit careful, because we don't want this to sound like a threat, because there's reality in this. We don't want it to sound like we're twisting arms, but we're still going to have old buildings. And you can't ignore what is starting to happen to aging buildings, right? So doing nothing is not an option. That means we're going to have to take dollars from one part of the budget to put it in a different part of the budget to start to repair the systems at Central and Hale. And those costs combined are $60 million. Now, if the referendum passes, the infrastructure costs here in this building are all included in the referendum. So that takes about $25 million out of the overall facility master plan needs. And so those dollars are going to come from the largest parts of the budget. When you're trying to find large amounts of dollar in a budget, you look first at where are the biggest expenses. The biggest expenses are in classrooms, right? In programs and in the staff of classrooms. So that means programs that reduce class sizes go up. The other thing, we wouldn't be able to participate in the partnership with MATC the way I described it. We wouldn't have new spaces for athletes and for performers, so young people that want to go into performing arts. And we still have older buildings compared to our neighbors. Right? I think we're one of the few kind of school districts within our region, except for Milwaukee Public Schools, that hasn't passed a referendum to reinvest in their school buildings. So a little bit of the high school consolidation plan and why Nathan Hale itself. So the structure of this building is just more sound. Right? It's newer, it's comparative, right? It's still an old building. But it's newer, it's more sound, and it has the length of revenue. We did go through a planning exercise looking at the central work for the combined high schools. Because if you're going to go to one high school, ideally it would be in the middle of town. Right. That would be ideal. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work unless you start buying up houses. Right? To have a modern high school where central is, we build out over the entire practice field. There goes the last little bit of green space. The academic part of it would be 5 stories tall. You'd have to put a parking structure where the parking lot is, just for more staff and students that drive. And then the athletic fields would be over here, right? And so it's not a viable solution. And the central solution costs $75 million more, right? And so, well, we could start buying up land and wait 40 years to see if we could get enough land together. This property with the building and the athletic fields is 54 acres. I believe that's the right number, right? So we're not going to find that kind of land in a community that's essentially built and landlocked. So it is a reality that we have to face. The unfortunate part of it, it's way on this side, it's way on one end of town. Right? And so a criticism of the land, and this is fair, is that students now have to ride more buses. There'll be many more buses, many more students on buses. That's true. So our plan is we're going to take part of the savings and invest it into the student experience with transportation. Right now, the longest bus ride for any student is 54 minutes. The longest bus ride when we have a combined high school way over here will be 34 minutes. So we won't make bus rides longer for those that have to get a ride bus, but there will be more students on buses. But what we'll also do is add after-school transportation with some of the savings. So for students that want to be in clubs and activities, there'll be a 4 o'clock or 4:15 bus. And for students that want to be in athletics, there'll be a 6 o'clock bus. Battery's dying. I'm trying to keep using this because we're live streaming this. Otherwise I'd give up the microphone because I probably don't really need it in the room, but they can't hear me otherwise. So the idea of the after-school buses increases opportunities for students to participate in clubs, activities, athletics. I had somebody come up to me like, well, right now, the musical lesson rehearsal over at Central, which includes students from Hale and Central, right? They're already combined in a lot of ways. They get done at 8 o'clock. Well, then we would add an 8 o'clock bus. All of these routes drop students off at their nearest elementary school, right? So we take some of the savings, reinvest it in the student experience. If this were to pass, the consolidation itself would begin with the 23-24 school year. It's going to take us a year in planning to put the details together on how to make this happen. It will be implemented in phases, but the current size of Nathan Hale would be able to hold all the students all at once while the building is still partly under construction. Right? So we have to start construction, continue to run a school here. So we would take all of the incoming ninth graders, those are our current seventh graders, and they would attend for their first year of high school at Central. Central, with just the number of classrooms, could hold 2,000 students. We'll never get to that number in the transition, but there's plenty of room. Then the following year, all 10th graders go over to Central, and they're actually starting the new high school. So that's where we get into the new naming and the colors and the mascots and all those kind of things. And all those students from our 3 intermediates become friends. They become the new one community, one school. We would still have the remaining classes of Nathan Hale here and the remaining classes of Central over at the Central building. So this will take 3 to 4 years to accomplish. The phasing of it, just like I said, so the numbers are really what happens at what point in terms of the remodel. So that's why getting some students out of the building and then bringing students back when there's enough space to move them back in. So a little bit about elementary and intermediate consolidation, because I mentioned at the beginning, there is a 20-year kind of vision of improving all of the school buildings. The reason that we started with the high school, there's 2. First of all, the board really felt that starting with the high schools is where every student eventually will experience the new building. So everybody coming behind the 7th grade class will eventually come to this new building. So everybody experiences it while we work on the rest of the buildings over time. The second reason is it's where you get the largest operational savings the quickest. Right? So there's a financial incentive to it to be more efficient. By consolidating some of the elementaries, and we probably go from 11 to 9 or 8, and probably from 2 intermediates to 1, that adds another $2 to $3 million in savings across all those buildings. So the savings opportunity really is at the high school level. What you see on the screen is the process we're using to evaluate the elementary buildings. Because there too, we know they're old, we can't keep up with all of them, and we don't need all of them. So we're analyzing elementary buildings on 25 criteria. That's work that's going on in the background. And those 25 criteria start to say, okay, this building is worth keeping and fixing. This building is something to probably close. An example of one that is likely to close would be Longfellow, so on the east side. It's a great little school, but you went to Longfellow. But 2 summers ago, there were literally bricks falling off the outside of the building. Nobody got hurt. It's all fixed again. That's what happens in all buildings. It's not an ADA accessible building. So somebody that needs a walker, a student in a wheelchair, they have 1 floor of the school to be able to use. Right? And that's very expensive to fix. That property would make a great park for the community. To have east side green space would be an amazing thing for that part of our community. But the decision around which schools has not been made yet. So Longfellow is likely, but the board hasn't decided that in the end. That's really in their hands. But that analysis is ongoing, just so if you're curious about that part of it. So, in terms of small group discussion, so this is where I get to stop talking, and then you don't have to listen more about this. So we want to kind of move into small group discussion. I will also kind of be around. We're going to move out into the lobby area of the auditorium here. There are 4 tables set up. And so if you're curious about all of these, then you wander around, go from table to table. If you want to spend all of your time, you'll have about a half hour, really focused in one area, then find that particular table. So we're going to have somebody that will talk about facility conditions and needs. So all of those things I talked about that really should be replaced, and that's Steve Eichmann. He's our manager of facilities. So he's available to kind of walk you through some of the details of that. If you're interested in design and construction management, so how do you make these phasing happen? What gets built when? What about the noise, right? When you're operating a school, those are all pretty interesting questions to explore. So we have representatives from Gray Architects and C.G. Schmidt. So that's their expertise area. So go ask them those questions. That'd be great. If you're curious about the budget, the finance, the tax impact, and transportation, so this whole idea of transportation plan, that'll be Caitlin Windler and Aaron Norris. So they'll be at a table out in the back. And then if you're curious about what do you mean by modernizing for hands-on learning, so what is this, all this hands-on things you do nowadays, or project-based learning that we talk about. So that's Deidre Raymer, our Director of Leadership and Learning. That's her whole area to lead. So that's how we'll kind of process through the questions that you may have. And again, I'm around, we have a board president, Jane Carr's around from the board, so we're happy to also kind of circulate and answer any questions. There are additional community information sessions coming up. So we're here tonight, obviously. There's one more that's virtual, that'll be next Thursday on the 31st. It's 2 weeks from Thursday, next week is spring break. Then one more on Saturday, April 2nd, and that really is because of feedback from some of our residents in West Milwaukee. They asked if we could add one there. We focus really on the 2 high schools because this is about a high school question. But we added that one because we're trying to be responsive to questions, responsive to feedback. There's also ways to, if you can't get a question answered tonight, if you go to our website, there's a referendum tab right on the right-hand side. There's a place to enter a question into the frequently asked questions document, and one of us will either respond directly or we add it to the document because we think, like everybody should hear the answer to this particular question. So there's a way to get additional kind of questions asked and answered and share those answers with other people. So with that, I'm going to ask you all then to get up and get some steps in, and we'll meet in the back there. We're not answering questions in here. We're all going to move to the back because that way more people get their questions answered. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for sharing your time. And when we're done about 7, then we're all heading back out into the nice weather.